So welcome, good evening everyone. Thank you for joining us. You're joining Hope in Action, Living Better with Less. This event this evening is being run by the Network of Wellbeing and the Resurgence Trust. I'm Flo from the Network of Wellbeing and I'm going to be co-hosting this event this evening together with Georgie from Resurgence. And we've also got a few members of both the Network of Wellbeing and Resurgence teams on hand to kind of support and make sure it's a warm, interactive evening for you guys. We're really excited about this evening's event. We've got three wonderful speakers to share with you, and we look forward to hearing their wisdom and also, hearing your guys' questions and interactions and sharings too. I'm just going to be kind of introducing the event and going through a few brief practical things before I hand over to Georgie to share a bit more about this event series, and then we introduce the speakers of the evening. But just to start off, just to say we love these events to be as interactive as possible. So if you would like to, you're welcome to say a hello in the chat box at the bottom of the screen, and maybe just let us know where you're joining from this evening. I say this evening, depending on where you're joining from, it might not be evening, of course. So yeah, very welcome to write in the chat box saying a hello, letting us know where you're joining from, and perhaps letting us know if you've joined previous events run by the Network of Wellbeing and Resurgence. It's always lovely to see if you're joining us for the first time or you've been multiple times. And whilst you're saying your hellos in the chat, and it's lovely to see them coming in already, I'm just going to share a few very practical things about joining this event on Zoom. I know you guys are very used to joining events in this way by now, most likely, but just a few very brief things. One is that we'll ask you to just remain on mute throughout the event, just so that we can really hear clearly the person who's speaking. The second is there's an option to either see the screen on gallery view or speaker view in the top right hand corner. So you can choose whether you want to see just the person speaking or the whole windows of faces into everyone that's joining us. And we do really love to see people's faces, so we encourage you, if possible, to have your camera on, because it's really lovely to be able to have that sense of kind of more personal interaction. That said, just to let you know, we will be recording the event this evening just to be able to share the recording link with anyone who isn't able to join us live. So just to be aware that you most likely won't appear on the recording if you're muted, but just be aware that there's a small chance you could appear on the recording if you're accidentally unmuted at some point. There will be a chance for questions for the speakers, and we'll go through how to do that, but we'll mainly be running that through the chat box, which we love to be as interactive as possible. So if you've got comments to share throughout the discussions, feel free to post in the chat. If you've got questions, we'll ask you to put a capital Q or a question in front of a question so our team can help pick them out, but we'll remind you about that as we go through, so no need to worry about it too much right at this moment. But just to briefly help us arrive fully this evening, I'd like to just guide a very, very brief mini mindfulness practice, just to help us be present in the moment, really, and ground ourselves in the event that we've chosen to spend our time on. So just inviting you to just check in with your body, just check in that you're sitting comfortably, perhaps rolling your shoulders a bit, or just feeling how you're seated and feeling if that feels good for you. And just gently, if you'd like to, you can take this opportunity just to very briefly shut your eyes, or just lowering your gaze a little bit from the screen. And just taking a few deep breaths, just to kind of allow this pause to let go of the day that's, or everything that's happened in the day thus far and everything that you're due to do for the rest of the day, and just really inviting you to be present here in this moment and in this event. And just perhaps checking in with your intention to be here. So the title of the event is Hope in Action, Living Better with Less. Just checking in with yourself, what drew you to join this event? What inspired you to come along? Just taking the chance to tune in to that intention or that interest or excitement. And then with a few more deep breaths, just slowly coming back to our shared space together, perhaps with a little bit more presence and awareness of the time that we're going to spend together in this event. So as I mentioned earlier, you're at Hope in Action Living Better with Less, run by the Network of Wellbeing and the Resurgence Trust. I'm going to hand over to my co-host now, Georgie, from the Resurgence Trust, to share a little bit more about those organisations and this event series before we then introduce our speakers for this evening. So over to you, Georgie.
Thanks, Flo, and thank you to everyone for being here today. This is our second in the Hope in Action event series, which seeks to support hope in uncertain times and nurture positive actions for personal and planetary well-being. We'd love to connect with you during and after the event, so those of you that would like to, we encourage you to use the Hope in Action Events hashtag to share highlights and connect with us and each other on social media. So as Flo has briefly mentioned, this series is hosted by Resurgence Trust and Network of Wellbeing. The Resurgence Trust is an educational charity that seeks to inform and inspire ecological regeneration, social justice, and spiritual fulfillment through its events program and also its publications, the Ecologist news platform and Resurgence and Ecologist magazine. The Network of Wellbeing is all about building wellbeing together. It runs online events and other activities to support a network of people who care about the well-being of people and planet. And they also run community projects focused on putting well-being into practice. So we're delighted to come together for this series. We'd love to, before introducing the speakers, briefly run a poll to find out how inspired you're feeling to simplify your life and live with less at this point in the event. So I'm just going to pull that up on your screens now and give you a few moments to respond to that so we can see how this event affects us. Excellent. Okay, so it's quite closely tied between varying quite a lot, with quite a lot slightly in the lead. We've got a few slightlys and a few not sure. So we've got quite an inspired audience here today, which is excellent. So I'm going to start, I'm going to close that now, and I'll hand you over to Flo, who will introduce you to Jen.
Thank you so much, Georgie, and lovely to see a little bit of audience interaction and how connected you are to the theme of this evening's event already. So like I mentioned, we've got three really wonderful speakers who have joined us this evening, and the first of which is Jen Gale. So Jen is actually really a beautifully humble speaker. So she introduces herself in her kind of bio as an ordinary knackered mum of two who dragged her young family along in a year of buying nothing new. So she's the host of Sustainable-ish podcast and the author of Sustainable-ish Living Guide and the Sustainable-ish Guide to Green Parenting. But we really are excited to hear from Jen because she really emphasises this accessibility of bringing sustainability into our everyday lives, no matter what walk of life we come from. So over to you, Jen, for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Flo. Thank you all for being here. I am feeling quite a lot of imposter syndrome with the other two speakers and feeling completely underqualified to kind of be here and to speak to you. But because, as Flo said, you know, I do think I am just an ordinary knackered mum of two. I've got two boys. If you do hear background noise, if you hear Lego being cluttered around upstairs, that's what's happening just pre-bedtime. So I will apologise in advance for that. And I used to be a vet, and I'm in Wiltshire in the southwest of the UK, and rather randomly, about, I think it was 2012, sort of mid 2012, I decided that we were going to spend a year buying nothing new as a family. I sort of often people say, well, why did you want to do that? And I'm still never entirely sure. I remember reading an article about a lady doing what she called her secondhand safari, and thought, well, that sounds quite fun. And it genuinely started as quite a sort of naive challenge. You know, I sort of said to my husband, oh, like, you know, should we do this? And he just sort of looked at me, and I'm somebody who has a lot of kind of air quotes, amazing ideas quite a lot of the time. And my husband, I think he's just used to me having these, you know, wonderful ideas and then being distracted by the next thing and you know, very rarely following through. So he just went, oh, right, lovely. Yes, lovely, lovely. I was hoping I would forget about it. And then I mentioned it to him like a couple of days later, and you could just see his face like, oh my God, we're going to have to do this, aren't we? So we had a slightly heated debate about what counted as buying new and whether a newspaper counted as buying new. And I said it did. And then we kind of, the kids were 4, just about to turn 4, and like 2. So kind of not really old enough to really massively grasp what was going on, to have much of a say, you know, as much as any preschoolers do as they're told. They kind of, you know, did as they were told and came along for the ride with us. And like I said, it started as this really quite naive challenge that I just thought would be fun. I was kind of vaguely aware of climate change. This was 2012, 2013. So this was pre-Blue Planet 2. This was pre-Greta, pre-school strikes. So, you know, like there wasn't, I think we're all vaguely aware of the climate crisis a lot of the time, but there wasn't the awareness that there is now. And I certainly personally hadn't joined the dots between kind of what we were buying and the impact that that was having. And I think I was probably the way, maybe not people here today, because we're probably a pretty engaged audience, but I think, you know, people in the mainstream who maybe aren't that engaged at the moment, just sort of unconsciously looking away. Do you know, I was like, oh, that sounds quite big and quite scary and quite serious, but you know, like, it can't be that bad because the government aren't doing anything about it. And surely if it was that bad, you know, the government would respond in the same way they've responded to the pandemic and things like that. If it was that bad, businesses wouldn't be allowed to do the things that they were doing. And surely, you know, if they're not doing anything, what can little old me do? There's nothing that I can do. And it's not really, I didn't see that it was my place, my within my my remit or my skill set or whatever to be able to do something about this. And so you know, and I'd been kind of again looking away, I think, from things like fast fashion and thinking, well, you know, it kind of feels slightly wrong that I should be able to buy 3 t-shirts for £5, but surely they wouldn't be allowed to do this if there was anything wrong with it. Come on. But the whole year really sort of forced me to reconnect with, or to connect maybe for the first time, to really slow down and think about what I was buying. Because I think for a lot of us, so much of what we buy is quite unconscious, and not in a malicious way, not that we're deliberately avoiding these issues or anything, but it's just we're busy, we're overwhelmed, we've got so many things going on, and we live in a society where convenience is king, don't we? Convenience is we're told the whole time that we need to be buying things. It's our, because we live in this capitalist society, it's our solution to anything is to kind of buy our way out of it. So we start a new job, we go and buy a new outfit. We start a new hobby, we look for all the things that that we need to buy for that new hobby. And in the same way, we'd say, right, I want to be more eco-friendly. What do I need to buy? Do you know? And I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about actually the most eco-friendly thing we can do is to not buy anything, but how that's actually really quite countercultural. And so during this year, we hadn't really thought about where we bought stuff previously, other than where we might be able to buy it cheapest, where there might be a sale on. It never really had occurred to me to ask who might have made this, where might it have been made. If I'd been asked about, you know, we've just come out of Fashion Revolution Week, and the question that everybody is encouraged to ask there is, who made my clothes? If you'd asked me who made my clothes or where were my clothes made, I would have said in a factory. I would have said I would have just assumed it was a big warehouse and there were all these machines and there were a few people floating around pressing buttons, making sure things were going right. It never would have occurred to me that, yes, it was a factory, but there were, 80 machines and 80 women sitting at these machines for 16 hours a day and sewing the same seam on the same garment, and that they've had to leave their small kids at home in order to come to this job, or that the sequins on my top had been sewn on by a child because they've got smaller fingers. Like, that would never have occurred to me. And then during that year, it was actually the Rana Plaza factory collapse happened in 2013. And, that brought sort of fast fashion to the forefront. And, the whole year was just this sort of series of kind of eye-opening events, and just thinking like, wow, I just never joined the dots. I had never stopped to think about where might these things have come from. And lots of people sort of say to me, well, what did you learn from the year, and what did you, and I, we learned loads of really practical skills. I learned, having never even sewn on a button, I sort of, because I'd called the year my make do and mend year, I was like, I've got to face up to this, I've got to do some mending. So I patched the kids' jeans and the patches fell off, and I patched them again, and I fulfilled a cliche by darning some socks, and and sort of explored all these other ways there were to shop or to get what we needed without being the default, well, at the moment it's kind of hit Amazon, isn't it? All that sort of thing. But actually the biggest thing I learned, right, I'm just going to share my screen. We'll ignore that one. That this kind of sums up the biggest thing I learned from that year, is this amazing quote by Jane Goodall, this idea that we can't get through a single day without having an impact on the world around us. And this idea that what we do does make a difference, and we get to decide, or we have to decide, what kind of difference we want to make. Do we want to make a positive difference or a negative difference? And this idea that all of these choices that we're making every single day, these often really dull, really mundane decisions about what to cook for a meal again, what loo cleaner to buy, what, that all of these are having an impact, and that we have the potential to make better choices. And that can start to feel a bit overwhelming, a bit like, oh my God. So, I've been known to stand there in the supermarket looking at 2 bags of apples and thinking, well, do I buy the normal apples from France or the organic apples from New Zealand? Like, oh my God, every choice becomes a can of worms and this really difficult thing to unpick. And so that's not saying that we have to tie ourselves up in knots with every little decision, but it's about trying to make better decisions more of the time, make more informed decisions, make slower decisions, because as I said, a lot of what we were buying, or a lot of, I think, what we buy as a society is very unconscious. I talk about this, going into Lidl's for a pint of milk and coming out with a fence sprayer, going into IKEA with a list of what you need and coming out with the tea lights. It's always the tea lights, isn't it? Like, there's this very sort of unconscious way that we shop. And we have a huge amount of power in the things that we buy. So this is a stat I found when I was researching my first book, and 60% of global greenhouse emissions are a result of household consumption. So it's very easy to feel like we're just a tiny cog or a tiny pebble on a beach, or it's a drop in the ocean. But that whole cliche about, all the drops in the add up to make the ocean. All of these decisions that we're making every day are contributing to the 60% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And so what this figure means is that we don't need to wait for the government to finish arguing and come up with policies, and we don't need to wait for businesses to decide what they're going to do. We can take direct action with those choices that we're making every single day to reduce that 60% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that's one of these stats that you look at and you're like, wow, but actually it's really, really empowering, because it does show that we absolutely can make a difference. So one of the things that I like the best, this is a wonderful graphic by a fabulously talented Canadian called Sarah Lazarovich, and it's the hierarchy of needs, and based on, loosely on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the idea obviously being that we start at the bottom and we work our way up. And it's just a nice breathing space between I want that or I need that and going out and buying it or sticking it in your basket on Amazon. I always say if I was brave enough to have a tattoo, which I'm very much not, then this would be it. And I think it's just to really, you know, whether you print it out and stick it on the fridge, whether you just have it, you know, in your handbag, whether you have it just so that it's kind of there in your mind. I know somebody, an old college friend actually, who, you know, she drew this out, stuck it on the fridge, and then her kids were like, mummy, I want this. And she was like, oh, hold on, let's have a little look at the hierarchy of needs. So I suspect her kids absolutely hate me now. But so this is just because what I found with that year buying nothing new was the fact that we had to look for something secondhand made me stop. Do you know? So instead of that very knee-jerk, like, oh, the kids need wellies because they're growing out of them, bang, like in the trolley at Tesco's. Oh, that's a nice t-shirt, it's got a dinosaur on, the kids would like that. Do you like, there's that, oh God, well, where am I going to get that from? And then actually thinking, well, do I need this? What have we got that we could already use? Could I find it secondhand? All those sorts of things was enough of a stopgap to make me, it meant that 9 times out of 10, I probably didn't make that purchase. Sarah, who drew this and created this, she's got a book called, I think, A Bunch of Pretty Things I Did Not Buy. And because she's such a beautiful illustrator, all these things she was tempted to buy, she drew a picture of. And I do a similar thing with the kids, and it works for grown-ups as well, in that when you're, you know, if you're in the shops and the kids are kicking off because they want X, Y, or Z. Right, okay, I'm going to take a picture of it on my phone. And if you still want it, remember you want it in a week's time, then we can have a think about getting it. And that works for us as grown-ups as well. So if you see something when you're out shopping, take a picture. If you still really, really want it and you've identified a need for it and all that sort of thing in a week, then you can go and have a think about where you might be able to get it from. But the idea with this hierarchy is obviously we start at the bottom. So we're using what we already have. Like I said at the beginning, the most sustainable version of anything is the one we've already got. So even though we've got capitalism and retailers and manufacturers telling us that if we want to be eco-friendly, we need glass mason jars and we need beeswax wraps and we need this certain type of travel cup because that one's no good anymore. And we need, actually we don't, you know, there are loads of things that we can make do with this old fashioned concept of making do. So using what you have is very much that make, do and mend. It's mending the things that we've already got. It's maybe upcycling something into something else. Sometimes it's just a case of rummaging through the drawer to actually find the thing that we kind of know is there, but actually it's easier just to order it because otherwise we've got to rummage around through all this rubbish to find it. So that's always going to be the most important one. Then can we have a look at borrowing? The borrowing and the swapping and the thrifting, they are a bit more difficult at the moment because of COVID restrictions and things like that. But there are loads and loads of great opportunities and sharing economies and things popping up. I think, am I right in saying in Totnes, there's a sort of whole sharing economy thing going on and a share shop and things. I'm up the road from Frome. That opened the first library of things, which is exactly as it implies. It's a library or a shop, and you go there and you borrow the things that you need, whether that's a fence sprayer or a high chair because the grandchildren are coming to stay or whatever, and you can go because this idea that we don't actually need to own all these different things. I'm just checking the chat that's not Flo going, shut up Jen, you've only got a minute left. No, that's all right, Fab.
2 minutes left, Jen.
2 minutes left, brilliant. So, you know, think, can I borrow? And it doesn't have to be a formal borrowing thing. It can be, can I borrow this off my neighbours? Can I borrow this off my friends? Has anybody got a thing? There's a statistic that the average drill is only used for 13 minutes in its lifetime. So is there a way that we can share these resources around between us? Can we swap things? Can we have a clothes swap? Can we have a toy swap? You know, are there ways that in the run up to Christmas or whatever that we can redistribute some of these things that we're no longer using and swap them with other people that might need them? Secondhand, shopping secondhand, obviously absolutely my favorite thing to do. And it's now, you know, it's kind of my default. So we're much gentler now, we're much more relaxed. So about our kind of rules about not buying new, but you know, it's still my kind of, okay, let's have a look on eBay. Let's have a look on, let's have a look around the charity shops. Let's have a look on the young people like Depop and things like that for these apps that you can use for buying clothes and things. So it's so much easier than it ever used to be to find things secondhand. So really utilize that. Join your local Free Cycle or Freegal network. See if you can find these things that already exist. If you can make something, I guarantee that you will probably not discard it next time you move, next time you have a wardrobe clear out, all those kinds of things. So making can be a really, really powerful thing to do. If you've got young kids, you're probably looking at me like an absolute idiot, but I promise you the time will come when you do have some spare time again. And you know, the lovely thing is that this hierarchy isn't saying you can never buy anything again. It's just saying, let's make buying the last resort instead of the first are just default, click Amazon, next day delivery. Let's see if we can make buying a much more slower, more thoughtful process. So we're thinking, if we are buying new, who might have made this? Can I get a fair trade version? Is there an organic one? Can I support a local independent retailer rather than giving Jeff Bezos even more money? There are ways that we can make these much more thoughtful decisions. And very briefly, in my last minute, just to say, really remember the ish in sustainable-ish. So I personally don't think that there's this green hierarchy, this triangle where we're starting off really pale green and we're working our way up to be uber crunchy, greenest of green, where we're living off grid and we're knitting our own yogurt. Actually, we're much more all these messy shades of green, these messy different shades of green on different days of the week in different areas of our lives, when it's lockdown, when it's not lockdown. And remember that it's not saying, oh, I'm seeing people in the comments saying, I've boycotted Amazon and things, and it's really doable. I haven't used Amazon for years, but if you use Amazon, you're not a failure. It's like, can you do it in a much more thoughtful way? So you're using it half as much as you were before, or a quarter of as much as anything like that. And so that's the way I think that we can make this much more accessible for people. Instead of having this very black and white or green and white, we talk about the shades of green and the imperfection and things that there are in between. So I think that was me. That horrible, I have to stop sharing because that green is reflecting back on my face and making me look really seasick.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was a massive rattle through, but I hope.
No, that's brilliant. Really, really inspiring to hear about your work, about your year of buying nothing, and how that's transformed into like writing and sharing and inspiring others to to really think through how they're consuming and their consumption habits. And I do think, as some have said in the chat, it's that kind of achievability of the message that you're sharing that is really resonating with people, and it's really powerful. And I also think it's a really interesting opening for our discussion this evening, because there's lots of different ways to approach this topic of living better with less, and you focus there on kind of the individual choices that we can make no matter our personal circumstances. We had an interesting question in the chat from Nicola, who asked, whilst I completely understand the impact of individuals making choices, should it be our responsibility? And maybe I'd say, should it be only our responsibility, or is that actually kind of letting kind of governments and wider powers offer?
Yeah, so this idea that we have, so I think there's this lovely Venn diagram, if we can all imagine a Venn diagram, where there's us as individuals, there's businesses, and there's governments, and what we're really aiming for is that sweet spot in the middle where everything's overlapping. But as individuals, we have a huge amount, well, there's individuals make up businesses and individuals make up governments as well. So imagine if all those people took that personal responsibility for prioritizing the climate, that would see a huge shift. But also as individuals, I was listening, I spoke to a brilliant lady called Sandra Sido, who runs something called, I think it's called Climate Pitch. And she talks about this idea that we have sort of 4 spheres, if you like, of power as individuals. So we have our power as consumers, and that I've talked about the power of our choices. We have our power as citizens, and that's talking about the power of our voices. So we can use our voices to speak to our MPs, to speak to our parish council, to speak to retailers and manufacturers, and we can do that on social media. We've also got our power as influencers. So we think of influencers as these, people swanning around on Instagram, but we're all influencers in our daily lives by showing up and making these changes. And we don't necessarily need to be bashing people over the head with a big bashy green stick. We just need to be doing that show, don't tell thing. So we have that power of influencers, and we also have power as change agents with any organizations that we work for or that we're involved with. So actually, this idea that it's all on consumers, and it's not, but we as consumers can absolutely influence business and government. I mean, even look at the plastic bag ban and the stirrer ban and things that came in. That was all a result of ground up grassroots pressure as a result of people like watching Blue Planet 2 and going, what the hell is going on? So we absolutely need government and businesses to step up and to do things, but we've got a massive role in helping encourage them to do that as well. That wasn't very succinct, sorry.
No, that was brilliant, thank you. That's a really helpful answer, and I really like the kind of choices, voices, influence, the different spheres and the different ways in which we can have an influence. And I guess I would maybe add that I've been quite inspired by Rob Hopkins, who founded the transition movement, who says, you know, governments, to paraphrase, governments aren't doing enough, individuals can't do enough alone. So we also need that kind of middle ground of kind of community engagement as well. So I think that there's, you know, to build on what you're saying, there's many different ways that we can create change. Consumption choices are one of them, and we need to be aware of the others as well, but also the accessibility of your messages. Do what you can where you can, and that's really resonating with some people in the chat, I see. So thank you so much for sharing. Just to let everyone know, we're going to hear from each of the speakers, maybe ask them 1 or 2 questions individually, then we'll have a kind of joint Q&A for all 3 speakers at the end. So if we haven't got the chance to ask your question yet to Jen, hopefully we'll be able to circle back to it in the main Q&A. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Georgie again to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you both. I am delighted to introduce Amisha Ghadiali, who is the author of Intuition and the founder of The Future is Beautiful, which is a really incredible podcast. It's also a book and a community, which inspires grounded optimism, weaving together activism, spirituality, regeneration, and creativity. Amisha offers the beautiful leadership immersion, which holds space for integrating these shifts into the way that we live, the way that we work and play. So Amisha, we're delighted to be joined by you today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and to all of you for being here and sharing this time together. And Jen, I can relate to being ordinary, and also we're all magnificent, and it's nice to remember that as well, that we hold both of those things. And so much of the journey that you shared, I mean, hats off to you, because I started working in sustainable fashion pretty soon after I left university. I'd studied politics and then done some work in Parliament, and at the same time had started to create a sustainable jewellery label and then get really involved in the building of the sustainable fashion movement. And I, before the days of Instagram, would share what I was wearing on a blog, and did a year of only buying 20 items of clothing or accessories. I had 2 years of that, and I used to share them at the end, and every single item. And that was hard enough. So I don't know how you did it with screaming kids in supermarkets that want the sparkly or the dinosaur wellies. So yeah, hats off to you for that. I feel like a lot of us can relate to this sort of culture of needing things and almost buying the thing rather than embodying the thing. And as Jen was talking, I was just scanning through the what are the words, like the items that represent activities that I never quite got to. For example, the rollerblades, the sewing machine, and so on and so on. And it was like, I want to do that. And just buying the thing was almost doing it, rather than actually, you know, going to someone's house and being like, I want to learn how to sew. It was like, you know, we kind of, something happened, didn't it, in the 80s and the 90s especially. And like, that's kind of what the activity became about for so many of us sometimes. And for me, I've worked really hard on shifting that in myself. And the clothing was a big part of that, because at that time, that was a huge part of my identity. And as I was working in the sustainable fashion movement for a number of years, was on the founding board of Fashion Revolution, worked at the Ethical Fashion Forum, was doing a lot about like building this network. We used to kind of laugh, because we sort of realized that this movement was run by lots of women that just loved clothes, and so had a kind of a selfish like interest in making this whole thing sustainable, because of course nobody likes the what it's doing to the planet and the modern day slavery that's part of it. And I think it was around 2012 that I really realized that just sort of wanting to buy sustainable things wasn't enough. It was like, what was that feeling that actually made me want the thing? And like Jen shared, often a week later, you don't want it anymore. It's just like it comes in that moment. And that really led me on a quest to say, okay, like my worth is tied up in these items somehow, like my identity is tied up in these items somehow. So what would happen if, instead of just changing how those items were made, swapping, doing all these amazing things that we can do, what if I actually really like went deep into like, why is it that I want those things? Why is it that those things are important to me? And what it came down to was that somewhere along the line, I had let go of that idea of being sacred, of this life being sacred, and of really understanding my worth in the world as a soul that's here with something to give and something to offer. And instead, it was all about an identity and something to prove and something to get kind of validation or approval for. And the deeper that I went into this journey, the clearer it was to me that the more that we spend our resources, whatever they are, I would say time, money, energy are our main resources. Whatever we spend these on, that if we spend them on experiences, if we spend them on learning, if we spend them on connecting, rather than on things, that we like something shifts inside of us. And not only do we become more whole in ourselves, but we strengthen our communities, we strengthen the way that we relate to each other. We break down a lot of those walls of separation that have sort of come up through the being able to own everything. And it's really interesting with COVID, how on one hand, people that have more are able to put up more boundaries, more barriers, more walls. Like it's, you know, well, I haven't seen anyone because I've got everything I need in my house, and my job means that I'm able to work from home. Whereas those that have less in terms of the socioeconomic status have been forced to share, to work, to be together. And what's also interesting, and this isn't a fact from any particular data, but anecdotally, I've been talking to people that have said that their shopping has gone up in this lockdown times as they've been home, that their Amazon buys or their clothing buys, suddenly buying clothes that you can't even wear because you can't go out, but that desire to kind of have more to fill that gap that's been left by not being able to spend time with people. And really like that addiction again. And then it just gets into this like awful place because the high street's been closed, but what happens to all those clothes that you return is like a whole other story. Most of them never go back into sale. They get burnt, they go into landfills. And so we've now created this culture where we've had all these people sitting at home feeling disconnected and then buying the stuff and then sending it back. And the same happens with Amazon returns, where it's all just like a big mess at this point. And so for me, this question of connection and experiences and opportunities. So one of the things that I did was in maybe like 5-6 years ago, I decided to move out of my house in London because I felt like I was always like wanting to kind of go deeper on experiences where I could connect with people and learn, but then having to kind of come back to sort of feed this big rent and this kind of lifestyle. And so I put my things in storage and I went off around the world with a suitcase, and I rarely wanted for anything. There were moments where you needed a new jumper, or you needed something like for the weather, or maybe some kind of occasion would come up. But I found that it forced me to connect with people deeper, because I was kind of like in these spaces, there wasn't a sense of like there's home and there's visiting, like everything was just life, and like this is happening now. And at the same time, I didn't miss my stuff, you know. I didn't think, oh, I can't wait to get that thing out of storage or that thing out of storage. And it just kind of shows us that we create these lives that are so based on all these things, and it's not really what feeds us, and it's not really what allows us to grow and connect and to co-create this more beautiful world, this more beautiful future. And so one of the things that I work on is this podcast called The Future is Beautiful. And this started as a project around about 10 years ago, 2010, in the election year in the UK, where I was thinking, hey, politics doesn't work in that we can't vote for a party that's going to create our vision of the world that we want to live in. And we all have to be vision holders. We all have to have a vision and be part of co-creating that. So I started to just ask people, I did these little like installations in the street and at events, and would ask people to vote in this ballot box that we made with their vision of the world that they want to live in. And really it's about actually opening up that space to say that you have permission to dream differently to how things are, that you have permission to imagine another world that's possible. And actually Rob Hopkins, who Flo mentioned, is on Thursday's podcast that's coming out this week. And he, of course, talks about imagination, as do many people, because when we're so focused on this stuff and this identity outwards, we can't hear that line of our imagination and our creativity in the same way. And we don't see what's possible. And so for me, a lot of what the work around The Future is Beautiful is about has been about opening up that possibility. What happens if you believe enough in yourself to believe that your vision has a place here? And maybe we don't know the timescales of everything. So we can let go of the fact that our vision means we have to stop the entire climate crisis. We have to do all of it. Just me, you know, because I've definitely done that before, had the weight on my shoulders. And I'm sure perhaps some of you can relate to that. But actually, what happens if we recognize that we don't know the timelines of any of this, and we don't know the timelines of our lives, but we know that we're here now, we're here at this time. And if we're carrying seeds within us of what's possible, and I believe we all are, I believe that we all came with these seeds of what's possible. If we allow our lives to be the planting and the nurturing of these seeds, then we don't know what's possible to create from here. And for me, this is a lot about what this work of beautiful leadership is, of allowing ourselves to recognize that these seeds exist, and that in all of the complexity of this world, that there's something so simple about the way that we can show up. And in a way, for me, that's also living better with less, you know, as a recovering intellectual, like trying to know everything and have all the answers. What happens when you just let go of knowing exactly, you know, who's right and what's more intelligent and how, you know, what are all the different theories around this? And then you actually come into that space of really feeling that space that's so simple within you, where you really connect to who you are and what it is that you have to bring to this world. And over the years of the podcast, which started, actually the very first episode was with the wonderful Charles, who you'll hear from soon. And that was about 4 years ago, and we've had 130 episodes since. And so often the themes that come up are around shifting our relationship with ourselves, with each other, and with Earth, and shifting out of that extractive, capitalist, consumerist mindset into one that acknowledges that connection, that acknowledges the interconnection that is there between us. And And, you know, if you had told me 15, 20 years ago that some of the best moments of my life would be moments just me and a tree, I wouldn't have believed you. You know, I would have thought that the best moments of my life were going to be something very different to that. But actually, when we really connect down to like what's important to us, having that relationship with ourselves and having that relationship with each other where there's nothing to prove, because we know like our worth, and we can see the worth of the person in front of us beyond any story of like what they do and what they've bought and what they're wearing and what they have. But we can actually see like who they are on a much deeper level. And then when we can really be in a space where we can listen to Earth, and we can be in a reciprocal relationship with our Earth, where we're not always taking, and we're really wondering, well, what can we offer back? You know, how can we live in this way where we don't just, you know, take a sunset and like capture the sunset and Instagram the sunset, but in fact we're able to be with the sunset, sing to the sunset, you know, give the sunset something that's like a gift of who we are. It just completely shifts our whole framing really of what it is to be alive.
Amisha, thank you so much. I feel just through your words that we've all dropped into a state of greater presence and connection. So thank you so much for all that you just shared. A question we have for you is, in this world where, and in this culture where we're often bombarded by advertising that informs so many of our social norms, what are tangible ways that we can begin to go against the grain and against the conditioned voice of worthiness that might tell us that we need more to be enough, and begin to come into that deeper connection with self, with each other, and the earth that you speak of?
I feel like the first step in that is just to recognize that we are bombarded with all these messages, and that they're coming from some of the most intelligent minds in the Western world. You know, people that work in advertising are paid a lot, and they're smart. And so when we just recognize that we are being influenced by these messages, then we can create just a little bit of separation between us and that experience, and then also try and limit those sources. So I mean, if you're wandering out and about in a city, it's very hard because you're going to see billboards and these kinds of things. If you're at home, you know, if you watch TV, like live TV, mute when the adverts are on, or don't watch live TV. Like, what if there's a few things that you really like to watch them on one of the players where you don't have to deal with the adverts, you know. Same goes for the radio. Like, just be careful what you consume, because our subconscious is so precious, and it gets influenced so easily. And so the first thing is really just to be aware of what you let in. Then the second bit is to be generous with yourself, and maybe even try and find it funny when you find yourself suddenly wanting things. I'm not averse to accidentally catching an advert and then being like, "Ooh, that's weird. I definitely do want a pizza now. That wasn't how I was feeling. And now you all want a pizza." And it's like, so then you can just laugh about it, right? That this is happening, and kind of pull back to what you were going to do before anyway. And really I guess the key part in all of it is to have some kind of practice, and a practice that centers you. And that might look like meditation. I'm less about the 20 minutes being perfectly still kind of meditation, but more around meditation that just softens everything, that gets you in your body, you know, just ways of being where you feel more connected to your truth, where you're able to release energy, and, you know, practices of just going out for walks and really listening and opening, and then that it just clears the noise, and then your intuition comes through, and your intuition says something much wiser, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Amisha. Really can't wait to hear more from you in the Q&A at the end. But for now, I'll hand you over to Flo, who will introduce Charles.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much again, Jen, and thank you, Amisha. Such wonderful presentations to hear from, and so inspiring. So I'm going to introduce our final speaker of this evening, Charles Eisenstein. It's wonderful to have Charles here with us this evening, and wonderful to hear about their connection, which I didn't realise, between Amisha and Charles, actually, that you had interviewed Charles on your first episode of The Future is Beautiful. So thank you for sharing that, Amisha. So Charles is an essayist, speaker, and the author of several books, including Climate, A New Story, Sacred Economics, and The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, which I think the latter being such a powerful title of a book, which evokes so many of the things that we've just been touching upon. So really looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us this evening. Over to you, Charles.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I'm maybe just going to pick up on a few of the threads and see what comes from that. Yeah, I appreciated Jen's description of herself as a knackered mom of two. I'm a father of four, and you know, I'm well aware of all of the pressures, and it's not like, you know, for me, a lot of the consumption, it's not because I necessarily even want those things or am meeting some psychological need. It's that the society that I'm in requires a certain amount of purchase of new things. Like, you know, I live in the United States, so like where I am, you have to have a car. You pretty much have to have a computer. There's a certain set of choices that is not entirely dictated by my circumstances. But I could say that if we were living in a rural village in India, that it would be a lot easier to never buy any manufactured product. And this leads to a common criticism that I do not think is entirely valid, but it deserves to be said, that by focusing on personal choice, like what do you consume, your consumer choices, you're kind of bypassing the need for systemic change and making things just a little less bad, but not doing anything to change the conditions that are dictating us to live a consumerist lifestyle. And to me, that means that there's got to be another reason to live with less, besides that it's going to save the world. I mean, and then there's just also the feeling of futility that comes from, well, I'm just one person and I can make do with less, but what good is that going to do? Seriously. Well, of course you could say if everybody else does it, then the world would be a better place. But guess what? I'm not everybody else. I'm me. And maybe some of you have been in this space of making do with less, and I'm riding my bicycle and, you know, there's someone speeds by in their fancy car and there's maybe some resentment there and they're not doing their part, and a hopelessness, because what's it going to take for them ever to do their part? So for me, though, I can honestly say that to the extent that I live in a more simple, less consumeristic way, it's not out of a desire to save the world. It is, in fact, pointed to by the title of our event, which is Living Better with Less. I want to, and another thing I want to just weave into there before, I want to show you some pictures actually, which I like never do, but I'm going to share my screen in a minute and show you some pictures to illustrate my point. But the other thing I wanted to pull in was Amisha's question of what am I, when I make, let me see, actually, I think I even wrote it down here. Yeah, what is the feeling that makes me want the thing? She said, like, what's going on there when I buy something that I don't really want and don't really need? And I think that part of it is, well, there's two things I would name, and there's probably a lot more, but one of them is an unmet need to connect, an unmet need to belong. In what I would call normal circumstances, which would be in deep community embedded in ecology, where everybody around you is multidimensionally connected to you. By multidimensionally, I mean, you know their stories, you do things for them, they do things for you, you know their parents' stories, you're in a web of relationship, and the same with the ecology around you, and you know that you belong, you know who you are through these relationships. And we, in a consumer economy, we are stripped of so many of those relationships, so that I don't even really, I guess I know some of my neighbors, but we don't depend on each other in any way. And under COVID, this has become intensified, the disconnect. Well, guess what? How do you connect to the material world when every possibility is stripped from you except making a purchase? You make a purchase, and here comes something to your house from the outside world. And it doesn't matter what it is, you are making a gesture of connection through that purchase. A material, like a material gesture, you're actually receiving a material thing. And there's almost no other way to do that. Yeah, I mean, you can go out in your backyard and pick up a stick, but as for the things that you actually use that are useful, it's a pretty big leap from the highly specialized modern lifestyle to actually being in material relationship with the people and other beings around you. Most of us aren't hunting for our food or gathering our herbs. I mean, some people are. And in fact, you'll find that the more you do this kind of activity, the less of the urge to shop that you will feel. And here is a clue to discovering what's really missing here. What is the origin of that feeling that Amisha was describing? Because you could go a level beyond what is the feeling. What's the origin of that feeling? That feeling of poverty, maybe, that feeling of lack. That's genuine. We are living in poverty. That's the thing to understand. The affluence of our so-called affluent societies is a delusion. We're not actually rich. Rich means a feeling that you belong, a feeling of security because you are held by these relationships. And if anything, if any misfortune befalls you, there's a lot of people that are going to have your back. That's wealth. Few of us have that. Instead, we depend on money to meet those needs. If something happens, what about me? To meet the need for security. And when it comes to shopping, you know, you need money to meet the need for belonging. This faint substitute for what a person really wants and needs. If those other needs are not met, the need for belonging, the need for security, the need to relate to materiality, and you're locked in a house in lockdown, then you take away shopping too. And what has really changed, except you're in even that one little thread of connection, that's gone too. So I think that part of living better, not just living with less, but living better with less, is to reclaim these sundered relationships that have been taken away by the modern specialization of labor, the modern destruction of community and its monetization, have been taken away by our public health regime in the name of risk minimization and safety. There's a lot to reclaim here and a lot of steps to take to bring us back into an experience of relationship, into an experience of affluence. And there's a second thing that another unmet need here that I would mention. It's the need for beauty. It's a need for aesthetic nourishment that is beyond just meeting our biological need for calories. and for warmth and for, for clothing. But what is natural, if you're out in a forest, this need is met because everything you see is beautiful. Everything. Everything you see is unique. Everything you see is alive or created by natural processes. There are no right angles. In the modern built environment, everything is standardized. Everything comes from a commodity, a mass production system. So the hunger for the unique and the hunger for the relational, the hunger for the thing that is made just for you, that is made with understanding and reference for who you are, that is never met. So how much of the mass-produced generic substitutes for that relationality that is expressed through material things do you need to meet the need for beauty and uniqueness in relationship? You need an infinite amount. There's no amount that can satisfy that need. And so this is another dimension of our poverty. And so I want to show you some pictures from a community that I visited in Brazil that lives in wealth. So I'm going to share my screen here. And I'm just going to show you a few pictures. And I'll just say before I show you, every one of these buildings that I'm going to show you was built by hand from scavenged, upcycled, and donated materials. Very little money was spent. If there was a broken pane of glass, they would build a window around that piece of glass to use that piece of glass. That's the extent to which they went. And you can see imagine living among an entire environment that is built with devotion. So let's share screen. Okay. Select a window. All right. Here's one. Okay, there's a greenhouse, and compare that to like the, PVC pipe frame, plexiglass, plastic warehouses. There's a house. There's a bathroom. They went and got bottles donated from restaurants, built them into the walls.
Sorry, Charles, the picture is not changing. It's still the same, the greenhouse.
Oops. Oh, okay, well, why? Maybe I have to. What if I stop share and I try again? Okay, there's a house here. Okay, here's the house. There, house. And now I will show you another one. There's probably a much better way to do this, but I won't show you everything because that would take too long given, oh, here's the bathroom.
If you close each photograph after you've shown it, it might let you.
Okay, good idea. Oh, because I closed it, now screen sharing a shot. Anyway, okay. You get the idea. And the people living there, they actually purchase very little because they're in community. They are in conditions that don't require them to exercise willpower and discipline in order to make do with less. They are actually enjoying a much richer life than almost anybody I know in the United States. And I know some very wealthy people that don't have what these people have. And you can see it in their face. You can see it in the way they look at each other. You can hear it in their laughter. So this is what I want. And of course, it's going to be better for the environment. And in fact, on some level, it is impossible to be wealthy from the impoverishment of others. Like if something is made in a sweatshop, made under miserable conditions, then when that item is delivered to you, it is going to carry with it misery. It's inescapable. And when a system is built on the despoliation of the planet, then it's going to carry that energy with it too. No wealth will come from that. So my motivation, or what I could offer you, is maybe to kind of a way to come to simplification of life, a way to come to less consumption through a different doorway, through the doorway of beauty, through the doorway of wealth, through the decision I am going to really live well. And really living well means that I live in a house like that, or that I have things like that, things that whenever I look at them, I remember the person who made that for me with love. And whenever I look at this, I can see the devotion that went into that. That makes me rich. That makes me feel present and belonging in the world. Welcome here. Like, what if you dedicated your life to really living well, for real, and saying, I am not going to accept the fake substitutes for a rich life. Only the good stuff for me. And then without a sense of sacrifice, you end up buying less. So I'm sure that you can see the possibility I'm pointing at, and maybe you can even see what next step presents itself to you, and what needs to be let go of. One thing that needs to be let go of is a habit of scarcity, a habit of hurrying, a habit of not enough time. Like all those buildings, every door in that community is handmade. Like all those buildings, they took a lot more time to make. If they could have spent just a little more money, they could have gotten, mass-produced Anderson windows and just installed all those babies, and it would have saved a lot of time. So, and this is the another aspect of real wealth, is to feel like you are the master of your time, to feel an abundance of time, to not be in a hurry. And a lot of that means just deprogramming from hurry, from efficiency. How do I get it done faster? How do I move on to the next thing? Because even when I don't have a pressing thing, I often feel that in anxiety. There's always something to do. And from that anxiety, again, comes all kinds of mindless consumption. So do I take the time to put devotion into my surroundings, for myself, for other people, and hold that as a value? That is a learning for me and for many people. So it's what am I ready to receive as wealth? What am I ready? Like, what's that next step? What's the next thing? What's that step into abundance that I'm ready to take? Real abundance, that I insist that I want to move toward a world of unique, alive, beautiful things. For real beautiful, because real beauty is a relationship. It's not something that can be met by an abstract, distant mass production process where it's made for the market and not for you. Real beauty is specific. Christopher Alexander says something like that. A home is not a shell for human habitation. It's an extension of the self. And if you don't have that, if your home is not things that you made for yourself or made with love for you, and I'm making an extreme case of it, but there's some truth here, then you won't feel quite at home in your home. So yes, I'm aware that I'm out of time. And so thank you for your attention, and turn it back over to the hosts.
Thank you so much, Charles. And sorry to have to wrap up your talk, because it's super interesting to hear your words of wisdom, and I feel like we could listen to all of you share for much longer, but it's also really wonderful to hear the diversity of perspectives that have been shared this evening as well. I just wanted to kind of share a reflection on what you've talked about, Charles, and I really liked the framing of what you were talking about in relation to needs, and I love the work of the economist Manfred Max Neef, who you've likely heard of, who talks about pseudo satisfiers for our needs. So he shares that we have these core needs, like some of them you've touched on, for things like belonging and beauty and time, and we actually try to meet these in false, fake ways. So, for example, we might feel like we get our belonging through the things we purchase, but actually what you're pointing to is, let's get to the genuine need beneath that pseudo satisfier, and then let's find more genuine ways to meet those needs. So yeah, really inspiring to hear your framing on that. Just to ask you one question before we go to the more general Q&A with the whole panel of speakers. I would be really keen to hear, so you've talked and shared those beautiful images of the houses in Brazil and the community there, and you also talked about earlier in your sharing about how there's quite a big leap from this kind of modern consumerist way of living that we're so pushed on us, to kind of having that more kind of time, that different sense of being wealthy with time and with relationships and with belonging. Do you have ways, examples of bridges, let's say, that have helped people make that leap? So either inspiring projects that you found or things that have helped you in your own life. Have you got, are there any bridges that you'd like to share with us this evening that can help people kind of transition from one way of being to another, or one way of meeting those needs to another?
I mean, there's a million things, but it could be something as simple like to reclaim some aspect of life from mass production and from the market. So, planting a garden and planting it large enough to share with your neighbors, or building something yourself. Like I built a chicken coop in my backyard that is patched together from all kinds of spare materials, and I mean, there's none like it in the entire world. I could have bought like one of these plastic chicken coops for $500, and I spent Lord knows how many hours. If I calculated how much I paid myself by saving that money, I mean, I probably made like $3 an hour or something like that. But it's me. That thing, like it's Charles. Like it's me. It's an extension of myself. It's a reflection that it's because it's so alienating to be in a world of standardized things, like that's not me. So this is just an example. Anything that you sew for yourself, build for yourself, make for yourself, or that is made for you by someone who knows you, and any capacity that you can develop to do that. So a garden would be just one little example of that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charles. And I'm sure there's many people who resonate and are avid people that love to get their hands in the soil. So yeah, thank you for sharing that example. So I'm going to hand over to Georgie now to open up our kind of wider Q&A with all three of our guests this evening.
Yes, thank you all so much for what you've already shared. We've got about 10 minutes or so for general questions for all three of our panelists, so do keep them coming in. The first question would be, it seems that people who are engaged in the environmental movement have this sense that living with less can mean so much more on all levels of our lives. But how can that be demonstrated to others, that life can be better with less without being accused of virtue signaling? And that's whichever you would like to start. I can't actually see. Oh, there's Jen and Amisha. Yes, who would like to go? Great, Charles.
I think that people will understand that you're not virtue signaling if you are not, in fact, virtue signaling. And that means not holding judgment about others, and being in a spirit of generosity that says, I would love for you to enjoy this plenty that I'm enjoying. I want to share it with you. I want you to have the good life too, rather than, oh, you're using more than your share, and I'm going to make sure that you feel bad about that. So I think it's just that simple.
Thank you. Would Amisha or Jen, would you like to add anything to that?
Just to add, like, why don't we stop using our energy labeling other people? And all we can do is be informed around why we're doing what we're doing, and really be connected to our intentions, and be humble enough to see different ways of doing things. But I just find all these labels really it keeps us all kind of stuck and questioning ourselves. And really we need to be rooting into ourselves, rooting into the earth, and we know if we're doing something with that intention.
I don't think I've got anything particularly wise or profound to add, but I just I'm very aware of the fact that living with less isn't massively aspirational for the vast majority of our society. So that's one of my questions, is how do we make this aspirational? Do you know, when we live in this capitalist society, and we live in this we are constantly bombarded with all these messages that we need X, Y, and Z and stuff, and that is what we are taught to aspire to from a very young age, by sort of conditioned to aspire to. It's so yeah, and this is something I still kind of struggle with. Is I think probably the audience that we've got here are really engaged and are really connecting with these messages that are coming at them. But I know there are a lot of people on the street who will just be like, I haven't got time for that. Like, what are you on about? Like, I can't slow down. I've got to put food on the table. I can't, like, yeah. So I'm just answering a question with a question. Like, I don't know how we engage, how we make living with less aspirational.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charles, Amisha, and Jen, and thank you, Jen, for that invitation, I guess, for reflection. And I think that that's part of our discussion, in a way, like you say, that a lot of the people here will resonate with the topics being shared, and yet a lot of us are thinking about how to share that wisdom in an aspirational way to kind of reshape the boundaries of the culture. And I guess there's somewhat of a tension there, in some ways, you could say, and this touches on a question that Marie asked for Amisha, but that could go to any in the panel, which is, how do you kind of loosen that weight on your shoulders of trying to change the world? So we've talked really powerfully about doing things without judgment of others, about doing things for the transformative power that it has on yourself. And alongside that, there's of course the understanding and awareness that we're living in quite a fraught time in human history, where things are looking precarious in relation to the climate, in relation to how society is going. So how do you engage with those issues without taking that weight on, but engage with them in a kind of meaningful way? So maybe I'll hand over to Amisha first, but then Charles and or Jen can share any reflections.
Yeah, absolutely. So as also a recovering Save the World martyr, what I can tell you is that when I was really focused on like making a difference and finding my way of contributing in the most effective way, and getting lost in all those arguments of, actually this is more effective, well no, because if you're doing that, you're doing this damage, and then this is more effective, but then you're doing that damage, and you're this and you're that, and all of this stuff. I just was miserable, and I burnt out, and I was ill, and I don't know if any of those actions were helping anyone. And where I've come to is that if I move from my love, if I move from my love of being alive, if I move from my love of my brothers and sisters, if I move from my love of nature, of this earth, then I've got more energy to show up more in all the different ways. And so I feel like this, just letting go of those stories, and perhaps it's also quite a British thing, you know, to kind of suffer and sort of, you know, suffer for what you believe in, and this is where, you know, I've been inspired by some of the movements such as pleasure activism, that Adrienne Marie Brown's book, but just this kind of that, yeah, we want to have a beautiful impact on the world, but we also want to have a beautiful life and be living it. And so it's very hard to do both of those things when you're stuck in that kind of martyr, taking on all the responsibility. The systems are so complex. They're so complex, and individuals can't do it like on our own. We do need shifts on all kinds of levels, all kinds of system changes. And, you know, that frees me up a bit, that it's not so consequential. I mean, God, I remember like I went to visit my family, and my one pair of like organic cotton leggings like ripped, and it was cold, and I was like freaking out because there was nowhere that I could get any. And I was just like, this is not how we live, you know, like all that anxiety going into something like that, which could be actually going into like looking like how can I create more meaning and beauty in the world? How can I live more meaning and beauty in the world? And then I've got so much more energy to be part of everything in a different way.
Thanks, Amisha. Such a powerful answer to come to that, to approach the whole change making from a perspective of love rather than anything else. Charles and/or Jen, would you like to add anything on that question? I'd be curious to hear, Charles, whether it is a British thing, that suffering for the cause, or whether that's also a case in activist circles in the US. Or...
Oh, that's in activist circles everywhere, and beyond just activist circles. It's one of the deep patterns of our civilization, the war against the self, the self-rejection that mirrors the war on nature. So it's very, very deep. And I would just say that, one, a lot of harm has been done to the world in the name of saving the world. Just to name an extreme example, Adolf Hitler fully believed that he was saving the world from the greatest threat humanity had ever faced, genetic degradation, and the Jews. Okay, which isn't to say that people saving the world today are like Adolf Hitler, but it should be a cautionary observation. And secondly, do you actually know how to save the world? That's kind of arrogant. And if you know, how do you know? And what's the formula for world saving? What our culture is comfortable with is that you count something. You derive a quantity, and then you go to work to minimize that quantity or maximize that quantity. And today the proxy for that is greenhouse gas emissions. So, you know, that makes things easy. You can tabulate every carbon footprint of every purchase and every decision you make in your life, and there's a shortcut to making ethical decisions, right? You just translate them into a number. And unfortunately, as in any numerical decision-making process, something is always left out of the numbers. And so you have horrible things happening in the name of carbon reduction, which I won't go into right now, but I'll finish by saying, because we don't know how to save the world, maybe all we can do is to listen for our part in a world-saving project that is vastly, vastly beyond our comprehension. And that the message that informs us what our part is the message of the heart that makes you care about something, and loves something and gets under your skin and motivates you to do something about this tiny little thing that the mind says, well, what big difference is that going to make? It's just one tiny little thing. But your heart is a vehicle of the transmission of the instructions for what you're supposed to do as part of the world-saving process. And so you know what to do and to trust that.
Thank you so much, Charles. And Jen, would you like to add anything or share any reflections?
I know I'm one of the people freaking out with the weight of the world on my shoulders.
As also, the honesty is also very welcome. Okay, I think, Georgie, we've got time for one last quick question before we draw to a close. So I'll hand over to Georgie for a last quick.
Great. So to end, each of you have incredible podcasts, and we have a question about how can we facilitate or create meaningful and deep conversations. Amisha, would you like to go first?
If you would like me to go first, Georgie, then I am honoured. When I started my podcast, part of the reason was that I felt like it was kind of before podcasts were really big, much of a thing in the UK, and I listened to various podcasts, and I just found that they went short of like what I was kind of interested to hear, and that they were so kind of salesy, solution oriented, and I was contemplating the complexity. And I guess also, I don't know, like this whole kind of thing of, I guess that one thing that I kind of wanted to do was to not have such an agenda with my podcast, and therefore let it be alive in its ownness, in its own being, and to let each conversation between me and that person unfold in a way where we both find ourselves saying things we've never said before, where there's like an aliveness that couldn't have been planned. If we'd sat there and said, okay, what are our talking points? Like, here are our bullet points, it just wouldn't have worked. And I feel like one of the most powerful examples of recent episodes is with Claire Dubois, from the founder of Tree Sisters, who, if you know Claire, she's just like full of transmission anyway. But we created this space together, and it both of us felt completely just like everything inside of us was shifted through having that conversation. And I want to also say that Charles helped me with this, because when I started my podcast, I had a list of people that I wanted to be on the podcast, and then Charles and I were at an event, and I asked Charles if he would be on the podcast, and he said yes. And then it happened kind of without space to pre-plan, and so we had that conversation, and it was beautiful. And I had people, who listened to Charles a lot saying, I heard something different in that conversation, and I, it's my favorite episode I've heard with Charles, and this kind of thing. And it gave me that confidence to keep going with that. And it's not made every guest comfortable. I've definitely triggered some rage at the need for certainty and the need to not look stupid, like that's come up at different moments. But the most of the time, it just opens up a whole field of possibility, of depth, and we allow ourselves to be moved, to not know where we're going, and to be in really deep presence. And that for me is when something happens that makes it worthwhile.
Thank you so much, Amisha. We would really love to hear more from Jen and Charles on that question, but unfortunately we're running short on time. So what we might do instead is we'll definitely share the links to all speakers' podcasts in our follow-up email with the recording to this event. And if there's any burning points either of you would like to share, feel free to say now, and otherwise we'll slowly start to draw this event to a close. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much to Jen, Amisha and Charles for sharing everything that they shared this evening. As we've touched on at the start of this event, this is Hope in Action is a series of events, and we would love to invite you guys to join us in future discussions, exploring different topics around what gives us hope at this time. So hopefully one of my colleagues can put in the chat box the link to our next Hope in Action event that you can save the date for. To close as well, we'd like to share, just take a brief screenshot of everybody so that we can share on social media, but we totally understand if you'd prefer not to be in the screenshot, feel free to turn your camera off, but if you're happy to be in the screenshot, then I'll just do that briefly now, even with the camera effect. Yeah, so thank you so much for being a part of this evening. We've got a range of other events run by both the Network of Wellbeing and Resurgence. I'll just briefly check in with Georgie if you want to share anything about any Resurgence events coming up before we say goodbye to everyone, or whether we can also include them in the follow-up.
We have a range of events. Yeah, we'll include them in the follow-up link.
Wonderful. Okay. So yeah, that was everything then for this evening. Sorry to run 1 minute over, but thank you all again for being here with us. All the links are in the chat and will be in the follow-up email that will get sent to everyone after this event. So thanks so much again.